Hello. Yes, I have returned to continue our little discussion of what it means to be a Nova in the world you live in. And I see you've taken well to your training at this facility. Yeah, pretty good. Not the greatest, but pretty good. Well, what's saying? Got any major complaints? Yeah, the mentors can be kind of annoying, I know. And yeah, I guess the outfits are kind of weird, but I mean, you're the person wearing an outfit made by an American, French, and Japanese team. That's all I'm saying. But anyway, so I thought I would discuss some of the powers, or at least how powers work for Nova, some of your biology and all that. Because, certain groups tend to be biased, and I like to give factual information. Some overviews of novas is that they are generally improvements upon the human form. Generally, this matters in subtle ways. Even without any powers, they're generally healthier, stronger, and live longer than baselines, as some novas call the normal humans. Ultimately, these are relatively minor, and unless otherwise augmented by certain powers or mega attributes, tend to fall within the normal range of humanity. An interesting trait, however, is that oftentimes after a first eruption, it tends to manifest. The user's physical form tends to change a little bit based on their desires, or at the very least to reflect some aspect of themselves that has generally not been well understood. This, of course, takes a myriad of forms, and given the certain appearances of certain novas, has me deeply concerned for the mental state of this world. But ultimately, that is a slightly different discussion. However, before we move on to quantum powers, which most training courses across the world focus on, it's important to focus on mega attributes. These are a technical term for powers that more or less augment normal human abilities or skills without really adding new ones, or any new powers they give are more just variations or extreme improvements upon already existing ones. This isn't the stuff of laser eyes or flight, this is the stuff of super strength. Generally speaking, remember how I mentioned how Nova's physiology is just improved from baseline by default mostly? This is like that taken to the max. There are roughly 9 categories of mega attributes, although somewhat arbitrary. It kind of think of it like a game of trying to stat out abilities, while the real world is a bit different. Mega strength is perhaps the most obvious one. It tends to make, of course, people very strong, which lets you do all kinds of crazy stuff. Lifting several tons, cars, trains, even buildings with high enough resolve becomes possible. Mega dexterity lets you basically go really fast and makes your reflexes really good. That sounds kind of silly until you realize that dodging bullets become possible. Or lasers. Or other really fast novas. This really quite do a lot. Mega endurance basically makes you really, really hard to kill. It will make it so bullets harmlessly bounce off your chest. You can regrow entire limbs, or just straight up adapt your physiology to survive in even the most extreme conditions. Mega intelligence is kind of what you imagine. It makes you really, really smart. Even at low levels, you're smarter than most humans. And by high levels, you make supercomputers look dumb. This, of course, lets you build all kinds of crazy inventions or figure out things nearly instantly, but it also allows you to suppress the effects of taint, which we'll get into later. Mega wisdom is perhaps, or mega wits as some people call it, is a bit more interesting. This is less about your ability to think as it is to react, to know. If mega dexterity lets you physically react, mega wits let you mentally react, and can let you do all kinds of crazy things as well. These guys are well known for standing in firefights completely calm because they know what's going to happen, and you don't. It'll also let you predict people, see if they're lying or not, and other such fun things like that. Mega perception is perhaps the most underrated power, but should never be ignored. It's theorized that most humans don't really think about much what they see. These guys see everything. Even at low levels, they will pretty much remember most of what they see, and they'll be able to pick out the tiniest details. As the effects go up, the senses become sharper than any of us could ever dream, allowing them to see all kinds of things, colors in darkness, or eventually develop senses uneven heard of. Okay, remember when I said that mega strength was the most obvious mega ability? Yeah, scratch that. Mega appearance might be that. Mega appearance may sound like the most ridiculous one, and if you ask me, it kind of is. But ultimately, it gives a pretty obvious power. Fundamentally, people are stupid. People are scientifically proven to listen to a pretty face more. Charming, seduction, and all of that falls under these abilities. However, as much as it might be obvious to think of the more obvious example of mega appearance, it does have a darker aspect. Mainly why most are attractive and very interesting, well, some of them are quite horrifying. There is something called the Nosferatu effect. Look it up. Mega Charisma, it might seem a bit odd, especially comparison, but it generally just makes people like you. You are charismatic in a way that's undescribable, friendly, homely, or just generally likable. This, however, has its own darker aspects, where, of course, no one respects Mr. Kind, of course, for blowing up the bank. He's too kind to do that. That's Mega Charisma. Mr. Nice totally blew up that blank, and he feels absolutely no shame about it. Mega Manipulation might be the most ominous ability of them all, as despite being a pretty close to baseline ability, it lets the user do some horrifying stuff. It can cunningly manipulate pretty much anyone into its trap with these powers. You won't even know, and at higher levels, you won't even know you're being manipulated. But even at lower levels, it will give you deals you can't refuse. And fundamentally, you always play into their hand. They're only 20 steps ahead, and quite possibly the only people who can challenge them with mega intelligence to a game of chess. Now, I've sit here long enough explaining gobbledygook, so I will explain to you what you probably really want to hear about. Quantum powers, what many consider to be the most flashy part of a superhero, and lets them do all kinds of amazing abilities. This is fundamentally giving you powers that humans just don't have access to. Yes, sometimes with some low-level abilities, people could master it or have a mutation that somewhat kind of gives them something similar, but these guys can do the real deal. However, I can't possibly give you a comprehensive list of all the powers, and I won't even try, because fundamentally, that would take all day. We're discovering new ones all the time, and quite frankly, I don't think that's very useful. However, quantum powers are very important, and the distinction from normal mega attributes must be noted. Like I said before, it grants you access to new abilities, but these aren't always super obvious. First of all, of course, obvious ones like X-ray vision, the ability to, fly, teleportation is common, phasing through objects, certain abilities like matter reflection, adapting to environment, that also kind of falls under mega endurance for reasons beyond my comprehension, and other things that go quite obvious, but there are even weirder powers. There are also powers like clone, which makes you create a clone of yourself, or of course the more flash ability of magnetism, just manipulate all the matter. And then there's abilities like power transference, and of course power transference and power like suppression is not commonly talked about. Most people won't tell you about them, but I will. I'll tell you their names. You can live questioning what those names could possibly mean. But ultimately, what separates quantum powers from mega attributes is that A, there's a lot more of them and they don't come from a derived part of humanity, but second thing is that they require a resource to be used. Or more accurately, it tires you out and you can't just spam it unlimited. While a person who has super strength can basically go keep lifting cars until he gets physically too tired, which will be a while. These guys have to run on a certain level of juice. These powers, I mean. Now, of course, there is no accurate way, but a lot of people like to call them quantum points. And since they make me think of fun RPGs, I'm gonna go with that. Ultimately, you have a certain set of power based on your quantum score. That's also another arbitrary term. The R node in your brain that gives you superpowers. Did I forget to mention that? The R node that gives you superpowers. Basically, the more developed you are, the more powers you can have because the more quantum points you have. I'm explaining this in a very gamified way, but ultimately, the more powerful you are is because the more power you have, which lets you use more powers and get greater powers. This all sounds exponentially good. You know what I mean? You get wait, you thought that the powers you have right now are all you're with? Oh, no. You see, my friend, you have, all Novas really are in a constant state of evolution, or at least for the moment. Well, technically it's not evolution, it's more adapting to environment / a bodily trigger / mutation, but hey, evolution sounds cooler, and I like saying it, so ultimately, this is important, as Novas can always gain new abilities. This is something not talked about, but Novas are very rarely stuck at one set of powers. They can usually gain more, and very rarely lose them. Now, of course, some Novas don't go out of the way to gain new powers, so they stay relatively stagnant. Some, however, keep pushing harder and harder until they seem like avatars of gods themselves. But with great power comes great insanity. What I'm about to tell you isn't super common knowledge. In fact, it's mostly covered up. It's something that the people in power don't want you to know. Everyone wants to think that novas are better than humans, and they have no downsides whatsoever to being a nova, and you should be one too. Well, not everyone, but loosely variations of that. And the thing is, that's mostly true. But with everything in this world, there's a cost. If you can think of one thing that doesn't have a cost in it in some way, shape, or form, congratulations, someone lied to you. Because there's always a cost to everything, whether big or small. And being a nova is no exception. Project Utopia wants to keep this information under wraps to make sure no one knows about it. The directive knows about it and publicly admits it, but ultimately says it's a few rare individuals, not a continuous problem. Not really. And Terrigen likes to pretend that it's just novas that fell off the wagon, so to speak. But ultimately, they're talking about the same thing they don't want you or the public to know the general truth of. Taint. Taint is the dark side of being a nova. It's the twisted part of it that separating yourself from humanity ultimately does. Now, Taint is unstable, to say the least. It is mutation, but it doesn't give you powers. It's not like, oh, I'm suddenly super buff and strong now. It's like my muscles have contorted and grown in size, but yet they're not any stronger. They're just hideous. My mind is shattering. In horrifying aberrations, your powers become ineffective. Your grasp of humanity slips more and more, and then your body just mutates in horrifying and abominable ways. And no one talks about that. Now, grant, there is a concept in certain communities known as permanent and temporary taint. Temporary taint is somewhat of a problem, but mostly manageable with good use of your powers and being careful. Permanent taint, however, is nearly impossible to get rid of and will slowly lead you down a path of losing your humanity until you are nothing more than a gibbering monster killing indiscriminately. Most don't want you to know about this, and I will tell you this purely because I like people to know, and I can't say it out too publicly lest I be hunted down. But ultimately, this is the price that a nova must pay, but it's more insidious than that. Even if you somehow keep your taint to a minimum level, which isn't impossible, is that it separates you from humanity bit by bit. No matter what mutations you get from taint, is that you will slowly separate it. You will have a hard time relating to humans, understanding baselines, and generally caring about them. You'll see yourself as above them, apart from them. Maybe you'll start to think you weren't even human to begin with. It doesn't matter what the excuses you make up in your head. That little voice saying you're better than everyone, maybe it's true to a degree. I think objectively on a power scale, yeah, most novas are. But fundamentally, it doesn't matter because that voice only gets bigger the more taint you collect. Taint can be fallen off, however. It's not a complete death spiral. It's not that all novas are doomed to become gibbering madmen. However, there's a price. Generally speaking, if a nova doesn't push themselves, doesn't take shortcuts to power, they can stay relatively free of taint. There's a certain level of power they can kind of achieve. Now, granted, they could somewhat continue to gain certain abilities, although some abilities gain taint pretty much automatically, but ultimately it can't be contained. But the price of power is ultimately a seductive force, isn't it? Surely a little bit of taint wouldn't be that bad compared to this new ability. Surely I can take on a little bit of it, and every time you do it, there's a concept that seemingly embracing taint allows a nova to gain new powers and mega attributes faster. This process isn't perfectly understood, but if I had to guess, it's the mind letting the guard down and letting mutation flow. But that's ultimately my theory. Ultimately, taint is a somewhat unstoppable force if you let it in. Like a vampire, don't let it in, keep it out as much as possible. But not everyone thinks that way, and sadly, that may cause the doom of us all. Of course, Terrigen has its cure, Chrysalis. Now, this is top secret information, so I'm telling you this in great confidence. Chrysalis is and I'll get more in detail into this later, but fundamentally, Chrysalis is the process of directing taint. It's a second eruption that allows a nova to reach its true potential, but ultimately separating it from humanity. Is that ultimately a cost you or anyone else should make? I won't say. Anyway, my time here does eventually fade. I must get out of here before eventually I find that I'm here. So ultimately, let this information ponder in your head. Maybe tell others, maybe don't, I don't really care. It's not my problem at that point. But ultimately, I shall return, because though I have explained to you the life of a nova, I haven't explained the world you're living in. And ultimately, that may be darker than any power. Yeah. Hey, why don't you hit that sub button? You're gonna become a subscribble. Get to see my content quicker. Wouldn't that be nice? I bet so.